So there's been quite a bit of debate between whether Bitcoin is a store of value or a medium of exchange. And I think that the three of us would agree that for a money to be perfect, it has to be both of those things. So we're going to break that down for the next little while here. And we're going to start with medium of exchange. We're going to go to store of value, and then why Bitcoin is the only property that you can truly own. So, boys, where should we start?
I actually wanted to start with so I've been on vacation the last couple weeks, and I went to India. And when I went to India, I noticed that you have to obviously use rupees there. You can't use, let's say, US dollars, Canadian dollars. What I noticed is that the exchanges, the currency exchange places, they take a massive cut out of your whatever you're giving them. So let's say, for example, if you want to exchange US dollars for rupees, the official exchange rate is like 86 rupees per dollar. But if you go to an exchange place, what they're going to do is they're going to give you 78 rupees for a dollar, 78, 79, 80. So what you're doing is, because you have to rely on this system with multiple currencies, because you have to go and exchange your currencies, you're paying a massive cut to some exchange place, to essentially to the financial system, in order to transact somewhere different. And the only difference between, let's say, Canada and the US, for example, we have that problem as well. When we want to go to the US, we have to exchange to the US dollar. The only difference is a line, right? In the on the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls, you pay with US dollars or with Canadian dollars, and in the US side, you pay with US dollars. That's the main difference, right? It's a line. And what this has done is it's given the financial industry a way to just extract more and more value from us. I see that as a massive problem. I think Bitcoin solves that completely.
Yeah, there's a huge industry in the financial services that makes money from FX exchange, from currency exchange, and even if like we largely live in like a digital world now, so we might use our debit card or our credit card, and we just see the transaction happen, on paper later. But in there is a 1.5% conversion fee, then the exchange rate that also has a spread on it, and we don't really pay attention to all of that. We just say, oh well, this just cost me this much money. It really makes no sense in this digital age that we have all of these different currencies. Bitcoin is a global money. And the other thing too is, right, like, we got to think of, okay, what are we exchanging? We're still exchanging something fiat that doesn't really have final settlement. And what it has, when it does have final settlement, it's still in something that is backed by just belief. It's not backed by gold like it used to be. So when we talk about medium of exchange, we might compare something like on-chain Bitcoin transaction to like a Fed wire transaction. And then on top of that, there's layers, right? So we talked about even the paper currency, that's kind of a layer. The credit card, that's a layer on top of fiat. And then with Bitcoin, we have layers on top of the on-chain, which the most popular one is Lightning. We can have incredibly quick, instant transactions, smaller payments. We have final settlement when those channels close and the on-chain transaction happens. But to me, it's just like, this has been designed to be a global money. And with the layers on top of Bitcoin, we can have like a very good medium of exchange with very little friction, very little costs, very little fees. And all of those fees actually go to support the network, as opposed to just get extracted out as value for these financial industries.
I think there's an aspect of this that I want to touch on, which is the micropayments, which is something that Bitcoin and Lightning has improved from our legacy system here. But kind of going off of what Forrest was talking about there, I think it's important for people to kind of understand just how much is extracted from the consumer and from the business owner. When we go to the store and we tap our cards, we don't get charged anything for that. It's part of like our privilege, I guess, as a consumer. But behind the scenes there, the business owner, they're getting charged about 2, 3, 4% just on merchant fees, just on being people being able to transact at their business. And so that adds up over time for sure. And the settlement part of that too is that even though if I went to Forrest's Cafe and I bought a coffee there tap my card, even though it comes out of my bank account that second, it actually doesn't arrive in Forrest's bank account for a couple days. So that's the settlement aspect there that I think that the fiat dollar struggles with. But I wanted to share this because this was a post I came across on Nostr, which is kind of going off of this exact thing here. So it's from Frank Corva, and it says Stripe, which is a payment processing company, generated 1.4 trillion in revenue in 2024, which means they took 42 billion in transaction fees. If merchants and consumers used Lightning or Bitcoin, instead, those fees would have been closer to 6.7 billion, resulting in businesses and consumers saving over $35 billion in 1 year.
Wow.
That's crazy. Yeah. And one thing I just want to put in there, Jor, is that, the businesses, they're the ones who see the fees for these transactions with like Interact or credit card payments and things like that when a customer uses that, but they cannot take on those fees. They have to pass that on to the consumer. So this is directly causing us more money when we go to the store, because that's all baked into the price of goods and services.
I think I saw something where it said how credit cards actually cost us something like $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
And we don't even notice. Right? If you're making $50,000 a year, that's 2% of your annual salary paid towards your credit card company. And it's like I said, it's an expense that you don't even realize it's there.
Yeah, it's just baked in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about it that way for us, that this consumer, even though it seems like we're getting it kind of for free there, it is passed on through increase in fees because somebody has to pay for that fee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. And I want to kind of introduce something that I came across as well in the last couple of days. Is there's this new company and this new product where a business owner like a cafe or a library or a public space, they can now set up a Wi-Fi network. And instead of either giving it for free or charging people like $5, $10, $15, you can actually pay in Lightning now, which is really interesting when you think about it, because as it stands today, imagine, you're sitting at a cafe, who's paying for the Wi-Fi there? It's the cafe owner, right? So either they're charging people and they're not going to have people come in the door because they don't want to pay $5 to use the Wi-Fi, or they're just giving it away for free as part of the service. And that's kind of what they've been forced into. Whereas now people could go hang out at a cafe or a library or wherever, and they could pay 30 cents or 40 cents or 50 sats, 100 sats. And that's not possible in the current fiat system that we have. The financial system would not allow for that to happen, because if they're charging me 30 cents, the bank wants 15 cents and the other payment processor wants 10 cents. So micro transactions weren't possible before Bitcoin, which is a really, really big idea, grand scheme of things.
It could definitely change everything.
I think Michael Saylor was saying something about how we can prevent bots this way too.
Yes. Why though? How?
So let's say, for example, if you wanted to make an account on Twitter to comment all of your whatever, the scammy stuff that people comment, for every account, basically you have to put a certain amount of Bitcoin up as collateral. And if you get reported a few times, or if somebody reports you as spam or fraud or whatever, your account gets blocked and you don't get that Bitcoin back.
Think about this too. Like that, it's so brilliant. And I really hope that this is kind of the world that we're moving into, because the three of us have YouTube channels, and I'm sure you guys notice every day how many bots are showing up in the comments. And it's just such a pain in the ass more than anything else, because you don't want people to fall for it, but it also takes time to go through each comment individually and delete them. So it's like, where's the trade-off there for people? But if you just said like, hey, if you want to leave a comment on this video, it's going to be 1 sat or 2 sats, which is fairly insignificant at this point. But imagine that applied to email and text and phone, where if somebody wanted to send me an email that's unsolicited, they have to send me 5 sats. Or if I left a post on Nostr or Twitter and I didn't want a whole bunch of spam in the comments, I could say, if you want to comment on this, you got to pay 2 sats, which isn't going to like prevent somebody from doing it, but it's going to prevent bots. And that only works, in my opinion, with a money supply like Bitcoin that's finite. Otherwise, you could just go around that. You could just print money. You could print tokens or whatever it takes to make more bots and just we get back to where we were. But if you have a finite thing like Bitcoin, then that kind of eliminates all of that.
You're just increasing the barrier to entry, right? Before it was free, anybody can
Yes.
make as many accounts as they want to, and if you have to pay even 2 sats, if you have to pay 1 sat, you have to pretty much you have to give away some of your wealth. It has to be worth it to you,
Yeah,
right? So
gonna
I think it'll push people to be more productive instead of just scamming everybody else.
yeah. There's a cost of spam basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And think about how much spam would exist if they had to give 2 sats for every time they set up a new account or left a comment. And so people might think like, well, if I have to charge 50 sats, and I think where this is going is that the user is actually going to be able to choose what their rate is. So if I wanted to receive an email and set up kind of a Bitcoin barrier there, I might say, well, it's 50 sats or 500 sats, depending on like how, in demand you are. You could set that yourself. And you might say, well, Jor, I don't want my mom to pay 500 sats for every time she calls me. But then you just say, okay, well, anybody who's within my contact list, they can reach me anytime, without paying sats. But if you're not in my contact list, then you got to pay 50 sats or 5,000 sats, whatever that is. Super cool idea.
Yeah,
very
yeah.
cool.
Or just return it if it's an actual, if it's like, let's say, for example,
Exactly.
if it's an email from someone like you guys, and I don't know you, you want to send me an email, I can just return the sats.
Exactly. And just the fact that you could do that so easily without permission, without paying somebody else a fee, like that's the whole idea here within Bitcoin is the micro payments. That's what this thing has unlocked.
Yeah.
So is there anything else we want to cover in terms of like the medium of exchange aspect of this?
I mean, I think we covered the majority of it. There's probably so much more that we can just dig deeper into, but let's go in. I'd say let's go into the second one, which is the store of value and why is it so much better than everything else.
Yeah, so let's think about this. We kind of compared the first one to the fiat dollar. I think this one, the closest comparison that I think we could spend a small amount of time on would be gold with this. So let's maybe look at a few different examples of why Bitcoin is actually a better store of value in terms of people's wealth. Plus, we have to keep in mind here that Bitcoin right now is about 1/10 of the market cap of gold. So let's compare these two things kind of like dead on and see how they stack up. Why is Bitcoin a better store of value than gold?
I think it's also worth mentioning just how important having a store of value is, because we're forced to store our value in all sorts of different things because we don't have money that stores value because there's nothing backing it. So before that, you could store your value in money because it was redeemable in gold theoretically, or it was gold before that, right, as coins or some other asset that stored its value somewhat like silver or things like that, right? So um, it's a massive problem that we have. We're basically allowing the people that control money to steal the value of that money from anybody that holds it. If we hold that currency through central banking, money debasement. So it's a massive problem, and that's why what's so interesting about a lot of people, they say, oh well, Bitcoin has no use case, whatever, it's like it's useless. What's the utility of Bitcoin? The utility is to have something that stores value. That's currently its use case. It will eventually become more of a medium of exchange and more of a unit of account and fulfill all the different uses of money. But right now, it's in its store of value phase, in my opinion, which is worth a huge amount of money. There's so many assets that are just being used as stores of value, whether it's real estate, gold that you mentioned, Jor, or bonds or debts. And there's just, all sorts of different assets that people use as a store of value. It's a huge, huge market.
I would actually say to that, I would say that store of value is probably the biggest problem we have as a society, just in general. Once we
I
figure
agree.
out a proper
Yes.
store of value and something that we can actually save for the future without other people being able to steal from us, it changes everything, right? So let's say with gold, if you wanted to buy a gram of gold, I was looking at the numbers for this, you have to pay something like a 30% premium. So
Because of the size of it, because it's a
right.
small amount. Yeah.
And then putting it together, like turning that 1 gram of gold into a coin will probably cost you exactly the same amount as turning an ounce of gold into a coin. So you're basically, when you get an ounce, you're almost subsidizing it with 28 grams of gold. But when you get 1 ounce of 1 gram of gold, you have to pay that entire fee as a lump sum. So if you think about it, people can't afford an ounce of gold. Not everybody can afford an ounce of gold. And if they can't, then they're priced out of saving.
I don't know if you guys have ever had physical gold before. I've had some physical gold in my history. They charge a premium when you buy it, and they undercut you like crazy when you try to sell it. There's a massive spread on gold. And like you said, if you bought a 1 gram bar of gold, a little tiny little piece, right? 30% on that. Like, how much does gold increase on average over time? Like, it's going to take years for you, like, an average of years, right? Because there's down years, up years, whatever. Average of a couple years at least for you to even break even.
Yes.
And then it becomes a store of value over time after that. But then you still need to find, a buyer. They're going to undercut you. The spread isn't crazy. You go on to any of these exchanges, I use Bitcoin well, their spread is 1.2%. So you're paying a premium for that Bitcoin, but it's only 1.2%. Bitcoin will fluctuate more than 1% a day, right? Up or down, right? So it doesn't take that long to work out that spread difference.
Yeah.
I think that this is something I just became aware of by getting burned by it, because back in 2020, when lots of uncertainty in the world, I flocked to silver. That was kind of like I had Bitcoin and silver at the same time. And I recently traded the majority of my silver in for cash, which I would exchange for Bitcoin. But like I ended up losing like a lot of money on that, because like I bought a lot of the coins from like an exchange or a dealer or eBay. And by the time I went to sell it, the guy said that he's going to have to melt it all down. So he's going to pay me like 60% of what it was worth. So I ended up losing money. And I know, like, as you said, Forrest, like this is something that after a lot of years, which is the purpose of a store of value, it's not something you just turn around and sell in a couple of years, like Bitcoin. But where I think Bitcoin to me makes the most sense is I think about it like a battery. And when we're trading our time and energy, that's what you kind of do every day. You go out into the world, you add value to it, you get something in return. And what you want to do there is you want to protect that. You want that to not lose any value there. You're storing it think of it like a battery. And the nice thing about it, there is no leaks. There's zero leaks in Bitcoin. If you bought some Bitcoin, you send a UTXO to your wallet, you don't have to do anything with that. There's no tax on that. There's no annual fee on that. There's no leaks in that battery. So whatever you put into there, you open that thing up in 50 or 100 years from now, it's going to be the exact same. It's probably increased significantly in purchasing power, but like there's no small like fee coming out of it every year, or insurance or a property tax or anything like that. So you want a form of a store of value that's going to protect you through years. And I think that Bitcoin is by far the best battery that we've found because of that. There's no leaks in that battery.
You also want a store of value that you can actually move around, right? Like with gold, you can't. Okay, so when I went on my trip, they had me declare if I'm bringing $10,000 worth of an asset or something. If I had gold in my suitcase, they'd find it and they'd probably take it, and there's nothing that I can do about it. I wouldn't be able to get through the border without declaring that gold and potentially getting taxed, potentially having it stolen from me, giving it to somebody else. Like, let's say if you wanted to take Bitcoin, your access to Bitcoin somewhere else with you, all you need is a piece of paper. So you can keep that piece of paper on your body. You can memorize it if you want to. You can memorize your seed phrase. You can't do that with gold. If you want to take your gold somewhere else, it has to be separated from you. Like, it won't. It's not a part of you. Essentially, if you, like with gold, you have to store it either, let's say, in a vault. You can dig it. You can make a hole in the ground. You can store it there. You can give somebody else custody of it. Bitcoin is the only store of value that you can actually store in your brain.
There's also other stores of value. I mean, besides gold, right? Like people consider real estate a store of value, and it kind of goes to both of your guys' last points, Jor, about your idea of a perfect battery. Real estate's a leaky battery, right? You need a new roof, you need maintenance. You might get a new foundation, new windows, all this stuff. You got to just maintain that battery state or improve it. And the entropy on something like a house is just incredible. It's just that house just wants to go back to its natural state of, being just broken up carbon. And then it's also not transportable at all, right? So that's what's interesting about Bitcoin, is it's a store of value, but it also has in my opinion, the perfect moneyness to it. It's transportable. So the store of value is transportable through time. And you could argue that gold is very good at this because it doesn't corrode. It's just, the atoms of gold are the element of gold. So it transports through time really well, but it doesn't transport through space very well. As you stated, Bitcoin does that way better. You can just memorize a couple words and, transport it through space, or you can literally send it over ledger, as opposed to gold, where you'd have to, insure it, send it, maybe even if it's a large amount, have some sort of security around it, right? And insurance is a form of security as well. So it doesn't perform as well as money. So it's really interesting to have a store of value that is also a fantastic money. Whereas, like even stocks, right? People buy stocks as a store of value. You can't, nobody's going to be willing to accept, an Apple stock for a meal at a restaurant, right? They just don't have the infrastructure built for that. So it's interesting to have finally something that is money that is also a store of value, which we do not have with the dollar.
I think it's all, sorry, one last point there. It's also important to consider the fact that not everybody even has access to prime real estate or to stocks, like you said, with Apple stock. If you want to go to Nigeria, for example, nobody has Apple stock in Nigeria. I mean, there are people who do, but it's very, very rare. The average person does not have Apple stock. So what that means is the average person probably can't get exposure to Apple stock, and they can't put their money into it. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, anybody can buy it. Anybody can put their value into Bitcoin, meaning that you have more purchasing power going into it compared to everything else. So like, let's say with Bitcoin, you can put all $900 trillion worth of wealth into Bitcoin. You can't do that with stocks, because stocks have, it's like you mentioned with real estate, they have their own risks and rewards associated with them. Let's say, for example, with Apple stock, let's say the entire world goes in and buys Apple stock, and tomorrow Apple starts creating more shares and they start dumping them on the public. You're screwed. You can't do anything about it, because, I mean, again, the same thing that goes to everything else. There's more Apple that can be created, more shares can be created, more Bitcoin will never be created.
Yes.
There's no other asset that can handle the world's capital.
Yeah.
Right.
The Bitcoin can handle that. It's baked in, right? All that happens is its nominal value goes up as more capital goes into it. It doesn't create more of it. It doesn't distribute it differently. It is just increases in value. That's the one metric that can change, right? And that's the metric that does change. And that's why people talk about number go up technology, because as more people want it, the only option is that number go up.
Yeah, that's one thing that we never really talked about. It's during this point is like, why is it a store of value? Because it's the only asset that has absolute scarcity. And I think back to a presentation that Jack Mallers gave at Bitcoin Atlantis a couple of years ago, and he talked about Bitcoin and gold, and he said that gold is stuck in the ground, while Bitcoin is stuck in time, which is like, it's just truly mind blowing when you really think about it that way. Because again, if more and more people, if all of a sudden the Gen X and millennials decided that, we actually want gold, this is a cool thing, we want to start accumulating it. The demand goes up for gold. What do? You go find more in the ground. You can dig it out of the ground. If there's more demand, you can go find more from the ground. If the demand for Bitcoin increases, nothing you can do. It's stuck in time. It's stuck in the future. That's the supply schedule. That's a scarcity of Bitcoin that no other asset even compares to. So that's the store of value. And I think that that's why we're having this conversation today, because, the perfect money has to be a store of value, and it has to be a good medium of exchange. It can't be one or the other. It has to be both. And that's exactly what Bitcoin is. So let's talk about the fact that Bitcoin is the only property that you can truly own. Because when I think about Bitcoin, you think about other things that you can truly own, which might be land, which might be gold, which might be a few other things. But what do you guys think about that part of it?
Well, I think real estate you don't really own. You're paying property taxes. They can take it away from you at any time. That's an easy one. That's an
Yeah.
easy one to rebut. Um, I would say the other thing too with a lot of assets is that Bitcoin doesn't deteriorate. You know, that idea again of that perfect battery of it just being, you know, it stays as a UTXO. It's permanently on there unless you decide to move it.
Mhm.
So it's something you can truly own, and in that way, it means that you can truly own it forever. Like as far as we can ever see, we can realize that, you know, at least a few nodes of Bitcoin software is going to be running somewhere, which means that somebody's holding a record of that Bitcoin on that ledger. And it's basically the most secure thing into the unforeseeable future in that way, where the vast majority of everything else disappears over time, gets broken down over time by the laws of the universe.
Yeah, it's there's also the way that I see it is, let's say for example, if you wanted to buy any other asset, you have to trust some entity in the middle. Let's say for example, if you wanted to buy stocks, you have to trust your custodian who's going to hold those stocks for you. You never really get self custody of your stocks. You have to keep them with somebody to ensure that you can trade them whenever you need to. Let's say if you wanted to take a certificate, a stock certificate, you'd have to pay something like $300-400. And what that does is it gives you full ownership of that. It's like a bearer bond where basically if you hold that stock certificate, you own the stock. But there are also a lot of issues related to that. So let's say that stock certificate burns or it gets wet, you get a flood in your house, that stock is gone, right? You can't rehypothecate that. You can't create that again. It's gone. It's never going to come back because that's your proof of ownership. That's partly why I think we do rely on custodians, because if we had to rely on ourselves to hold on to the stock certificate, then anything could happen to it. It's gone. You only have one opportunity. There's that single point of failure. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, you can create it over and over again. You can, let's say, for example, if you put your seed phrase into multiple wallets, you can store those wallets anywhere you want to. You can also access your Bitcoin from anywhere in the world. Let's say, um, let's say you leave your Bitcoin in, let's say you leave your private keys in Canada, and you want to rehypothecate them again in another country. You have them memorized. You want to get another wallet, and you want to get access to them again in, let's say, China. You can buy a wallet, enter your seed phrase, and your Bitcoin is there. You can't do that with any other asset. You can't move around like that with anything else, especially gold, right? Gold, it's stuck in one place. You can't access it from multiple places. There's also the fact that with multi-sig, you can do
Yes.
multi-jurisdiction multi-sig, which gives you the opportunity to access your Bitcoin from, let's say, multiple countries. So let's say you have a 2 of 5 setup. So you only need 2 keys out of the 5 total. Let's say you have your keys in 5 continents. You go to 2 different continents, you can access your Bitcoin. Any other 2 different continents, you can access your Bitcoin. You can't do those with anything else, right? You can only access your other assets from one location. When I went to, like I was mentioning India before, when I went to India, I couldn't access my bank account. I couldn't access my credit card. I wanted to order food. I had to put in my code to actually to pay for it to confirm that it was me. And because I didn't want to pay for roaming, I couldn't access my credit card. I couldn't access the funds on my credit card. That it doesn't work that way in India with Bitcoin. You can use your Bitcoin from wherever you want as long as you have a wallet. You can transact with anybody in the world. You can send your Bitcoin to anyone. To me that gives you true ownership. And there's also the points where there's no property tax. That's true ownership, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can stop you. Nobody can censor your transactions.
I think this is like a perfect way to sum this whole thing up is like the fact that you can store it, the fact that you can move it, the fact that you can protect your time and energy, which is what we all want to do. What I think of here, Forrest covered the land aspect. Obviously, you know, if you think you own land, but until you stop paying the property taxes, see if you still own that land. And I think the closest thing that I think of when I think of something you can actually own yourself without that third party risk that Rajat was talking about is like cash or like gold. Except the problem with those two things to me is that if somebody broke in your house or your house burnt down, I mean, the gold might be there, but it's there. you don't fully own it. Whereas Bitcoin, if you do it properly, and it takes a long time to kind of set yourself up, I think, to get there, but you could have like zero trace of Bitcoin in your house. You can essentially maintain full ownership of your keys without having to trust anybody else. And to me, through multi-sig or through other ways, that is true ownership. When nobody can take it from you, when you can maintain full ownership and access to it without having to trust anybody else, I think that that's where it all kind of ties in full circle here for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well put.
So, do you guys got anything last points to add on this? Where I think we covered quite a bit there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we went pretty deep into that.
Yeah, I would maybe
Okay.
just say that there's a degree of ownership, right? I mean, you could argue that you can own gold, but as you said, Jor, like it can be taken from you. You could make Bitcoin so that you own it and no one can take it from you. And
Yes.
that is again like that ultimate ownership, and arguably maybe the only true ownership of anything, right? So all, you could say you own your home, but again, if you stop paying your property taxes, then you will no longer own your home. So it's a degree of ownership. So it's maybe a spectrum, but Bitcoin's really far over there on that proof of ownership.
Actually, I have one last point. With every other asset, another person can kill you to take it from you, right? If they really want to, they can
True.
bomb your house and they can take the land underneath it. They can bomb your house and they can take the
Yep.
gold that you own. They can take your cash. They can kill you and take your cash. They can't do that with Bitcoin. Once you're dead and gone, if you're the only person who knows where your private keys are, if you're the only one who knows where your seed phrase is, nobody can take it from you. It's all voluntary, right? Even if somebody's torturing you, you can voluntarily keep getting tortured and not give them your private keys, and they can't do anything, right? They're just wasting their own resources torturing you. I mean, I know those are pretty negative situations to be in, but I mean, the key here is that nobody can take your Bitcoin from you if they try to force it away from you.
You can own it in the afterlife.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was going to say there, Rajat, is like, yes, it's a extreme scenario, but the point is that even if that were to happen, they can't take it from you. That's the point.
Yeah.
Not whether or not that will happen. It's the point that if it did, they still can't. So the incentive's kind of broken there for somebody to attack you or to torture you, because, even if they're as hard as they want to, as Rajat said, it's voluntary. So you have the ability not to tell them if you want to, which if you're a robber or somebody in that position, that's going to be very frustrating for you versus just taking the cash or taking the gold or whatever that is. So
Yeah.
anyways, great chat, boys. This is the first official video, I guess, since we launched the Maple Bitcoin channel. The other videos were kind of in a time machine there, but we just want to say thanks to everybody who has subscribed before we really got this thing fired up, and we're excited to be here. So we got a live show coming this Friday and every Friday going forward, and we'll have some more information for everybody coming. So thanks, fellas.
Awesome.